Hello and welcome to another board game war game review. Today we're reviewing Hammer of the Scots from Columbia Games. This is a block war game, a traditional block war game in the Columbia tradition. This is one of the main war games from Columbia War Games. Two-player game set in the Scottish Wars of Independence, where one player in the south will play the English, the other player to the north will play the Scots. So the English player in red, the Scottish player in blue. And the objective of the game is to get the most nobles at the end of the game. It's interesting in the sense that usually a lot of these games are about conquering certain locations or inflicting damage on your opponents, and obviously damage or casualties. Obviously, this is the case here, but the end game is to win the most or to have the most nobles at the end of the game. And you can get nobles by either defeating them in combat or by conquering their home location in a specific phase called wintering, which I will explain in a second. When the nobles return home and you've conquered their home, then they flip sides. This is a game that will take about I would say 2 hours to play. It's a fairly easy game. It's one of the easiest war games that I think I've played. And it can be learned quite quickly. So, for example, in terms of rules, this is the rule book. The rule book literally has 8 pages. And out of those 8 pages, one is a scenarios page, so then you will immediately get 7 pages, and there's also an intro. So we're looking at 7 pages of rules, which is pretty straightforward, pretty easy for a war game. So I would recommend this game as, for example, if you want to introduce your friends to the hobby, to the wargaming hobby, this is certainly a good game to start with, especially if they like the theme, obviously. But it's also got enough meat in theme that more experienced wargamers will enjoy. Like I mentioned, this is a block war game, and I've prepared the setup here, and as you can see, the idea behind these block war games, if you haven't played one, is that the blocks are facing in your direction, and the English blocks are facing, as you can see, they're facing south, and the Scottish blocks, as you can see, are all facing north. I'm just gonna flip them a little bit here. So the Scottish player can always see his or her blocks, and the English player vice versa. So there's fog of war that is only broken when a battle begins, and players basically flip their blocks like this, so you can see who is taking part in the battle. The game basically, I'll give a quick intro about the game, then I will talk about the components. Typically I would speak about the components first, but I have an issue with the components, so I'll leave that to later, and then I'll do my review and final thoughts. So in terms of how the game is played, not exhaustively, but basically to give you an idea, there's going to be a card phase in which players are going to play a turn. And there's going to be a move phase, or obviously, as the name implies, you move your armies. And then there's a battle phase. And at the end of each year, there will be a wintering phase. Basically, the game is played in years, starting in 1297 if you are playing what is called the Braveheart scenario, or starting in 1306 if you are playing the Bruce scenario. You can also play a campaign game that starts in 1297 but continues until the end. So what I mean to say is that in the Braveheart scenario, where we start in 1297, you play until 1305 if no sudden victory was accomplished by then. If you're in the campaign game, which obviously is going to be longer, you just continue playing throughout the years with a couple of adaptations. Um, the game. So in each year, basically, you're going to play 5 cards. So you're going to do 5 actions, and then, like I said, at the end of the year, there is a wintering phase. The map board, as you can see, is the north of England here with a dashed line, and then up from there you start to get into Scotland. Basically, there are some castles in the game. Castles like you see here, Badenoch with a 2. You see Angus with a 2. Menteith with a 3. So basically, the castles give you basically have a limit to how many troops you can have there. They reflect the economic value of the region rather than military strength. They will tell you how many troops you can have there, and also what are the RPs, the replacement steps that you will acquire from there to get troops on the map, or to replenish strength on the troops that you already have there. And in terms of areas, basically there's two types of borders. There's these red borders, as you can see, which are mountains, so movement is limited, and there's the green borders, which are plains, where the movement is not limited. And there's also a dashed line here between England and Scotland. There's also some cathedrals that give, like you can see here, there's a cathedral here, which give a bonus to the Scottish player. And most of the areas in the game have a coat of arms, like you see here, Atholl, Badenoch, Mar, which indicates the noble that that house, that region belongs to. So, for example, if we see here, we have Atholl, and Atholl, as you can see, this is the noble block for Atholl. Easy to spot because it literally has the same logo. If we see another one here, Argyll, you have the Argyll block here. Basically, you want to be able to defend your areas where your nobles are, so you can keep them. In terms of blocks, I'm just gonna show you a couple of blocks. So this is obviously the famous William Wallace, and I think if you've watched the movie Braveheart, and if you like that movie, this is the type of and if you like war games, obviously this is the type of game that you'll enjoy. This is William Wallace, the block, and all blocks have the same configuration, and which I will explain. Basically, the number 4 is the number of pips, is the strength of the block. As the block takes hits, one hit, they will be flipped like this, another hit flip like this, another hit flip like this, and another hit eliminated. So the number of pips is the number of dice that you will roll in combat. So William Wallace at a strength of 4 will roll 4 dice. The 3 is the movement factor, so how many regions the block can move, and then the A3 here represents the priority in combat. So A's go before B's, B's go before C's. So, for example, we have here another block, Grant. In this case, the William Wallace block is an A, the Grant block is a C. So A's go before B's, who go before C's in combat, because combat is not simultaneous. And so A's are better than B's, B's are better than C's, basically. And the number next to it, so A3, C2, the number next to it means how much you need to roll in order to score a hit. So for William Wallace, anything up to 3, so 1, 2, or 3 is a hit. For Grant, 1 or 2 is a hit. So obviously, as you can see, William Wallace is much stronger than Grant. And finally, some blocks have a black cross here. The black cross indicates that they are eliminated from from the game if they're defeated in combat. If they're killed in combat or if they can't retreat, they are completely removed from the game instead of being possibly replenished. There's a few other blocks. There's I won't get into it, but there's obviously the blocks with these logos like Dunbar here are nobles. Then you have blocks like the one I showed before, Grant. This is not obviously it's not a noble. It's just infantry. There's a couple of interesting blocks. One is the French block, which is a special block that the Scots can add to their draw pool. So this isn't on the boards. I have a draw pool. You can add the French block to the draw pool if you have an X number of nobles. There's the Scottish King, which can be basically, this is a very interesting thematic block. You can have a Scottish king on the board if certain conditions are met. So you can have either Bruce or Common as the Scottish king, or King Balliol. There's a few different conditions for the Scots to have a king, and there's 3 candidates for the throne. Like I said, and you can at some point bring elect a king or nominate a king. Basically, to give you an idea, to crown Robert the Bruce, William Wallace needs to be dead. The candidate must be, so Bruce must be in 5, and you must play a card and say, "This is I'm coronating the king." So this is some folks have criticized this game as being a little bit abstract, but I think that these things bring theme to the game. So the fact that you can nominate a king and you have 3 different candidates, the way you bring the French block. There's also a Norse block for the Scots, which can only move by sea. So the Norse block cannot move by land; it only moves by sea. There is also an English king, which is Edward, and Edward will be the beginning of the game. Edward is Edward the First, and after a while, he can become Edward the Second. So if Edward the First is killed in combat, or if you're in the Bruce scenario, Edward the First becomes Edward the Second, and there's some different advantages there. So this just helps to bring theme. Basically, the way the game works is you're gonna have a common deck of 24 cards. I've sleeved these cards, but the cards don't come sleeved, and the cards are very simple. There's 25 cards. The cards are either 3s or 2s or 1s, and all of them. And basically, then there's 5 event cards. There's Herald, there's Truce, there's Sea Move, Victuals, and Pillage. And the events are basically, they're self-explanatory. Whatever says on the card, you just do it. But at the beginning of each year, we're going to shuffle this deck and give 5 cards to each player. You're then going to have 5 turns during that year, in which at the beginning of the year you start by choosing a card and playing it face down. So basically, let's say that the English have played this one face down, the Scots have played this one face down. We reveal, and in this case, 3 beats 1. So the Scots player will become the first player, so they will play first, and then they will use this card to move, and then after they move, the English player will have their chance to move with a 1. In case of a draw, I guess this was a 1-1 or a 3-3. The English player goes first. If there is an event, if one of the players has played an event and the other one has played a card, then the player who has played the event goes first. The event is done completely. And you can also pass on doing the event, and then the other player goes. It's worth mentioning that, interestingly, there is a little bit of a bluff element here, or I don't know exactly what to call it, because if both players play an event, then both events are triggered, but the end is immediately over. Even if this was the first turn, the first out of 5 turns during the year is immediately over, and this can happen. This can happen right in the first turn of a game. So there's a lot of positioning, and you need to think when you want to play your event, because it might not be worth for you to trigger the end of the year. So basically, the way the cards work is, let's say that you have you've played a card 2. You've got two group moves. So with the 2, you can move 2 groups. So for example, I can move this group here, Athol. I can move them somewhere up to their movement factor, like I explained 2. And I can move this group here, which is comprised of 2 blocks. Each of them has movement 2, so they can move together. So, and then you're going to do your movement. I'm going to say I've activated this one. I will move this one here, and I will activate this one, and I will move this one here. For example, this has been my turn, and then the Scots player would do their turn, basically the same type of movement. You're going to have either 1, 2, or 3 group movements. And the only thing you need to look out for is the borders, like I mentioned, because the green borders, which are more prevalent here in the south, allow you more movement. The red borders, not as much. Basically, the green borders, with the green borders, you can move up to 6 blocks. So for example, from here to here, you can move up to 6 blocks. But with the red borders, you can only cross 2 blocks. And if you cross a red border, you need to stop. So in this case, I was doing a movement, and these 2 blocks, like I mentioned, have a move factor of 2, so they can move 2. They are moving through this red border, so that's 1 movement in 2 blocks. If I had 3, if let's say we're like this. If I had 3 blocks, I can only move 2 blocks through this red border. So I will move these 2 here, and I can move this one here. But because they still have 1 movement factor, but because I crossed the red border, they can't move any further. Whereas this one could have moved here, for example. So red borders, which are more prevalent in the north, make movement harder. You can only move 2 blocks, and you need to stop the moment that you cross a red border. So that makes your logistics of movement slightly more complicated, or no, not slightly. It makes it more complicated. In this border here in the south between England and Scotland, actually 1 movement point allows you to move 1 block. So if you want to move these 4 blocks, you need a card of 4, which it doesn't exist because there's no card like that. But so with a card of 3, you can move 3 blocks into Scotland. But then you're not going to move anything else. So this movement here is more restricted or more limited. Because this is where the English player is going to have the bulk of their army and their reinforcements. There's in the game there's 3 types of regions. Basically, there's areas that are friendly if they're occupied by you. There's regions that are contested if there's an unresolved battle, which we'll see in a second, and enemy regions, obviously, and then there's also vacant regions. Then there's a few other things. There's like the way the Norse block moves, like I mentioned, they only move by sea, and there's the concept of pinning, which is basically if I move these 2 blocks here, and I'm literally attacking because these 2 blocks are attacking these 3 blocks. There's a concept of pinning, which says that these 2 blocks that I've moved have pinned 2 of these blocks. So because the Scottish player still has 1 more block, they can move that 3rd block. They can move it elsewhere if they want to, but 2 of these blocks are pinned, and obviously this is important for battle. How does battle work? Battle has the battle has another very interesting thing, which is there's a couple of blocks, which are the Wales and the Ulster block, and I'm just gonna show you one of the Wales blocks. These Wales, because these Wales and Ulster blocks, because they are considered to be untrustworthy in battle, or you can't rely on them too much. Basically, you need to roll if you're in battle with them. And this is, I was searching for the Ulster block. This is the Ulster block. If you're in battle with them, the English need to roll a die to see if they're gonna flee the battlefield or not. 1 to 4, no effect. They stay. 5 to 6, they flee the battlefield and they go back to your drop pool. They're not eliminated from the game, but they go back to your drop pool. This is the way to show that they were not entirely reliable on the battlefield. In terms of battle, I've already made this movement here, so just to simulate, what we would do is the English player sitting on this side, the Scottish player sitting on this side. We're going to flip the blocks as they are, like this, to point the strength at my opponent. So these pips here are the ones that are counting. Obviously, if let's say that Wallace had taken a point of damage, then they would have one less. And there's going to be an attacking player and the defending player. Obviously, the attacking player is the player that moved to attack, in this case the English, as I moved from here to there. And this is the Scottish player defending. The combat is very straightforward. A's go before B's, B's go before C's, like I mentioned. In case of there's more than one A on each side, one B on each side, or etc., the defender goes first. So in this case, we've got William Wallace is the only A on the battlefield, so William Wallace goes first. He currently has a strength of 3, and he needs to hit on 1, 2s, or 3s because of the 3 over here. So William Wallace is gonna go first. So I'm gonna roll 3 dice. So William Wallace rolled a 1, a 3, and a 4. So those are 2 hits, the 1 and the 3. 2 hits. The hits must be taken by the strongest army on the other side. So in this case, so in this case we have a 4 and a 3, as you can see. So Northumber is going to have to take the first hit, and then the second hit can be taken in this case by either one of the units because they're at equal strength. So the defender chooses. So this has been round 1 of combat, and Wallace has attacked, and then we would go to the Bs. And the Bs, there's only one B, which is Menteith, but Menteith, who started the battle with strength 3, now only has strength 2. So Menteith is going to roll 2 dice. He needs to hit on up to 2. So Menteith is going to roll. He rolled 2 4s, so no hits for Menteith. Disaster. And then we would go to the C's, and the C's are going to be Barclay and Douglas, 2 C's. They would go first because they're the defender, and Northumber goes after that. So I'm going to roll 8 dice. So for the first 4 dice are going to go for Barclay, hits on 2s. So 1 hit with Barclay. So we're going to do like this. And now Douglas hits on 1, 2s, or 3s. 2 hits for Douglas. So 1 hit, 2 hits. And now the other C would go, which is Northumberland. So they would go. Basically, the fight, the combat works like this. This is an example in a nutshell, and it goes on for 3 rounds. If at the end of the 3rd round, one of the armies is still standing, if at the end of the 3rd round, the attacker is still standing, the defender is still standing, then the attacker must retreat. So in this case, the English are the attacker. If they at the end of the 3rd round of combat, the Scots are still here, it's as if the English have lost and they need to retreat. There's a couple of more things that I didn't explain, which is when you take your turn, you with the unit that goes. So again, first the A's, then the B's, then the C's. Defender goes first in case of a tie. You can retreat. So instead of attacking, you can retreat, and there's some specific rules for that. But if you feel that you're overwhelmed or whatever, you can retreat to an adjacent either neutral or friendly area. And then the other thing that I think makes sense to explain is that when I was attacking and I was moving with the English from here to there, I could have during the same round moved another block here. So I could have done my first movement from here to there with these blocks, and then with my second movement, I could have done like this. This block is a reserve. This block, when we reveal the blocks, this block isn't revealed, and it will enter combat in the second round of combat and so forth. So the block is steward. So we would finish the first round, and then on the second round, the English player would reveal the block. There could be multiple reserves if there were movements from different locations, and the defender can also have reserves if the defender has done a movement. In this case, I don't think it's possible, but actually it might be. No, because Robert the Bruce only has a movement factor of 2, so they're not able to. They're able to do 1, 2, but not reach the battle. So the attacker is going to have reserves, the defender is going to have reserves, and the reserves come in the second round of combat, and in the third round potentially if there's still combat. So that adds a strategic element to the game, because I think in many of the games that I've played, both players have had reserves. They've strengthened their position. Then obviously there's retreating, there's regrouping. Regrouping is basically the victorious army. Let's say that this army has been soundly defeated and they retreat, and basically they couldn't do this because only 2 blocks can retreat through a red border. So I'm just gonna take one of these blocks out. Basically, the victorious blocks will stand up at the end of the battle. We're gonna stand up, and the victorious blocks can do something that is called a regroup. Regroup means that they can move to any adjacent friendly or neutral areas. Importantly, in combat, like I mentioned in the beginning of the game, the objective of the game is to capture nobles. And we have a couple of nobles here, a couple of English nobles here, Steward and Menteith. If they were to be defeated in combat, meaning that their pips would take damage and their pips would go down to 0, they would be standing like this, with this part up. They would flip sides over to the English, which means that you would replace these blocks, these red blocks, with a blue block, and you would then put them in combat. So I'm just gonna demonstrate here. So let's say that this red block Steward was at strength 3, then strength 2, 1, nothing. They flip sides. They go back into the they go out of the game, and they are replaced by the same block but in blue. And this is how nobles flip from one side to the other. The same block exists in blue and in red. They would enter on the Scottish side with a strength of 1, so the lowest possible strength. And if there's an ongoing battle, they would now fight alongside the Scots. I guess loyalty is extremely flimsy. And this is one of the ways that you can conquer blocks. I would say that the main way to conquer blocks is in the wintering phase. The wintering phase takes place in a year after both players have played their 5 cards, so 5 cards each, or if both players played an event at the same time, the end of the year is triggered, then you go to wintering. In wintering, it's kind of a cleanup phase. I won't go through everything in detail, but just for you to have an idea, the nobles go home. So wherever the nobles are, they're gonna go home. So let's say that Menteith is here. Menteith would go home. This is actually a good example because let's say, okay, Menteith was here, as you can see, and this is his home. Menteith would go home. The problem is that Menteith's home is occupied by none other than Robert the Bruce. Because it's occupied, basically what happens is that Menteith immediately gets flipped from a red block to a blue block at the strength that they were in. In this case, it's not at the minimum strength of 1, it's at the strength that they were in. So Menteith changes allegiance to the Scots. So the English block, the English nobles go home first, then the Scottish nobles go home, and then there's a bunch of separate rules. There's some Bruce and Common can go to 2 different regions, etc. The English will disband. Any blocks will disband unless Edward is wintering in Scotland. But Edward the First can winter in Scotland. Edward the Second cannot. Many blocks can winter with Edward the First in Scotland, and then you're going to have to check. Each castle will be able to hold 2 units. So you need to check if you have enough in each castle. For example, this one has a castle with 2 plus a cathedral, so 3 units can stay there. So I have Wallace, I have this one, so I have 4 blocks. So theoretically, one of the blocks would need to be removed. Obviously, this isn't going to happen because the nobles would need to go home. But the idea is that the numbers in the castles indicate how many units can stay there after the nobles go home, and if you've exceeded that, then your blocks go back to the draw pool. And then you're gonna build. Each of these numbers is a replacement point, and you can use the replacement point in that area. For example, here in 5, you can use a replacement point to add strength to your blocks. So this is, I've added 1 strength, I've added 2 strength, so I've kind of replenished that unit. The other thing that you can do is you can go to your draw pool, and there's a draw pool which is off camera here, but it's the blocks that they're not on the board. You mix them, and then you can get a unit on the board at strength 1. So the RPs are used for both of these things, to bring in new blocks and to strengthen existing blocks, and you can combine those 2 as whatever you want. So in a given wintering phase, I can bring in this block with 1 RP. I can strengthen it up to 2 with another RP up to 3. So I've used 3 RPs, 1 to bring it and bring it on the board, and 2 to strengthen it twice. And the English are also going to do that, but the English are going to do something which is called the feudal levy, which is if Edward is not wintering in Scotland, so if Edward is not present in Scotland, then half of the blocks, rounded up, all the blocks that are in the draw pool are going to be placed here. And this is actually quite massive because there's going to be, I know from experience in playing this game a few times, that there's going to be a lot of English blocks here that are then going to be available in the next year to move upwards. Obviously, the English are always going to have massive strength here. The only issue is that they're far away and they're going to have to move up. And certainly one of the elements in strategy in the game is that the south here, southern Scotland, is quite easy for the English to overrun because they're close, because they're going to have advantage in units. and because there's a lot of green borders up to here. But then the English will have a harder time breaking through in the north and being sustainable in the north because they're further away. Because of the red borders, because the Scots typically are going to have more units there, so that's kind of the trade-off. There's a few other things that I haven't mentioned, but that's essentially it. The players will return their cards to the deck. The deck is shuffled, so it's always the same deck of 25 cards that's shuffled, and the new year starts. How do you win the game? You win the game at the end of the year of your scenario. Whoever has the most nobles will win. If at the end of the William Wallace scenario at 1305, if both players have a draw in nobles, which is not possible in the second scenario, the Scots win if William Wallace is on the map. The English will win if William Wallace is dead or in the draw pool. This is just a tiebreaker because the rule is whoever has the most nobles on their side, red blocks versus blue blocks, wins the game. There's just to end this. There's a couple of sudden death rules. If any player has all the nobles, then they win a sudden death. And the English player wins immediately if there is a Scottish king. If the Scottish king was nominated and the Scottish king dies, so if the Scottish king dies, that's a big problem. Sudden death for the English. And the Scottish player immediately wins if Edward II is eliminated from battle. So if there's no longer Edward I, when there's Edward II, if the Edward II is killed, then the Scottish player wins the game. This is the game in a nutshell, and honestly, there's not much more than this. There's a few more details and exceptions, but this is the game in a nutshell. It's a pretty easy game. There's also a digital implementation of the game on the website Rally the Troops, which is pretty good. And it enforces the rules. Enforces the rules. And I just wanted to talk a little bit about the components, and then I will give you my kind of review thoughts. The components are actually already a part of the review in this case. This edition that you see here is the so-called Deluxe edition, and I have a problem with it being called a Deluxe edition, especially for the price point. I generally don't. I'm generally not impressed with the components on this game. So first of all, the cards, as you can see, the cards, their art is less than inspirational. The cards all look the same. So, and you can see here they're sleeved. So I think they actually look a little bit better sleeved. But you see the cards are like this, and on the back they say Columbia Games instead of having the logo of the game or the image of the game or the cover image of the game or whatever. They just say Columbia Games, which I feel is a missed opportunity. And even these cards with the events, they just don't look very impressive. And again, I'm saying this because the game is a so-called Deluxe edition. Then the second thing is you can't see very well, but the board. The board is it's not a mounted board. It's thick cardstock, which again, for this price point, I would have expected a mounted board. I know that a lot of war games don't have mounted boards because they just don't. Some of them even have paper maps. But in this case, I was expecting a mounted board. Again, Deluxe at this price point. This is flimsy cardboard. Not sure why they call this Deluxe. The blocks themselves are pretty good, but I've noticed that the stickers aren't. You need to be careful with the blocks because the stickers aren't of the highest quality, so you might start to lose some of the color, and some of the corners can get scratched and everything. So just be careful with the stickers and the way you shuffle the blocks, and the way you keep the blocks. The blocks themselves are pretty fine. They're easy to read, etc. The game also comes with 2 spare blocks. The other one is the rule book. The rule book is fine. It's nothing to write home about. It's fine. I would have liked to see potentially a rule book with 2 more pages and showing some playing examples instead of just saying, if you have this and that, the example, the English player has 4 blocks here, 2 blocks there, those blocks attack there, etc., etc. I would have liked to see some playing examples. It would have been as easy as adding 2 more pages, but the rules are fine. I guess they're easy to follow. This is not a complicated game. The other thing I'm a little bit not too excited about is that some of the things there could have been a little bit more in terms of counters. So, for example, because one of the players does all of their movement and then the other player does all of their movement, you need to keep track of who is the attacker in this battle, who is the attacker on that battle, etc., etc. And sometimes, I mean, it's obviously you just need to keep track of things, but it would have been easy to add a counter, just putting attacker on this side. You have a battle here. It would have been easy to just put a counter here saying attacker. Perhaps there could have been also a counter to indicate reserves, but in this case, honestly, what I do is I just put the blocks, the reserve blocks on the back, and finally the other one is I need, for example, these 2 blocks, if they've moved from here to here, I need to keep track of where they came from. So it would also be good to have a counter indicating that. So these are my criticisms of the game. It's the components. I know that some other players have criticized the game for being a bit too abstract, a bit too simple, but I think the game has enough theme and enough chrome. Things like I mentioned, like the Scottish King and the Norse and French blocks, etc., and Edward Wintering, Edward II, and later. I think the game has enough theme and chrome that it doesn't feel abstract, and it's still a very streamlined game. I think strategically, it's a great game. It's very easy to learn. But it has a lot of depth, and you want to think. I'm going to move here. I'm gonna win this battle, but then I'm here with Menteith. I'm gonna move here. I'm going to win this battle here, but then the English are going to come here, and when Menteith goes home to winter, actually his home is occupied, so he's going to flip sides. So you really need to think about these swings, and that's what makes the game beautiful. I think the game is easy to learn. It has good replayability because of the fog of war element. It's always going to be a bit different. You have 2 different scenarios. The blocks that come from your draw pool are randomized. For the English, sometimes the king comes in here in the south. Sometimes it doesn't. You need to make a decision whether to winter him in Scotland or not. With the Scots, you need to make a decision. Do you want to nominate a king or not? And there's enough variability that the game is going to feel always different. There's a lot of back and forth, almost like a tug of war thing. And I think it's a great game for both war game beginners but also for more grog nerds. I think the theme really shines well. I'm certainly not on the camp of those that think that the game is abstract. However, like I mentioned, the components bring it down a little bit for me. So normally I would give this game an 8 or an 8.5. But because of the components, this being a deluxe edition and the price point of the deluxe edition, I'm going to give it a 7.5, which is still pretty good. And again, it's just not higher because of the components. If you don't care too much about components, then it's easily an 8 or an 8.5. But yeah, the components are bringing it down a little bit for me. I think the best thing about this game, I've had a blast with moving with William Wallace around it, just wrecking havoc. But then also the King Gatherer is pretty powerful. I think it's just a lot of fun, lots of fun. Great fog of war game, great blocks war game. I think if you want to have one block war game in your collection, this is certainly a good choice. And those are my thoughts on Hammer of the Scots by Columbia Games. Thank you.